Indicio webinar. A couple housekeeping notes. Please don't unmute yourself or share your video, but please do put your questions in the chat so we can monitor them and get them answered. If you are watching this as a replay on our YouTube channel, you can always add a comment and we monitor those and can answer your questions there. And if you have any technical difficulties throughout the webinar, also please mention that in the chat or the comments and we will work to solve those. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce Trevor Butterworth. He's our Vice President of Communications and Governance here at Indicio. So Trevor, take it away.
Thank you, Francis. So let me welcome Henry Patishman, who's Executive Vice President of Identity Verification Solutions at Regula, and Heather Dahl, who is CEO of Indicio. So let me give you an overall sense of what we want to talk about today and why it's important. So we have, with Regula and Indicio have partnered, and Regula is a giant in identity verification. So why would a giant in identity verification partner with Indicio? Because, well, we, through verifiable credential technology, can make what they do fully portable, which means we can now avail of the highest level of digital identity assurance and make that fully portable, cryptographically independent, so you can take your identity and the data associated with it anywhere in the world and have it simply verified with complete assurance. So that's the magic of the partnership, and we'll talk more about the ins and outs of that later. But first, I think let's talk a little bit about the problem that we're solving. Now, if you're my age, at least, you've seen the start of the internet, the start of the World Wide Web, and a consistently escalating trend of identity fraud year on year with increased cost, both in terms of the losses to individuals and businesses, but also the cost to businesses to protect their data. But it feels like something different has happened over the last 12 to 16 months. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Henry to give your sort of expert, drone's eye view of the identity landscape. Has it changed? What's happening? What's the story?
Thanks, Trevor. Well, we're seeing a fundamental shift in fraud. Digital identity fraud is no longer the work of professionals alone. There's actually been a 244% rise in amateur fraudsters just over the past year. And with generative AI tools now readily available, just about anyone with a phone can become a fraudster. And at the same time, over 40% of all identity attacks are now AI assisted, making them cheaper, faster, more scalable than ever before. What is interesting is that fraud isn't necessarily exploding in volume so much as it's mutating in form. What used to be a linear attack, a stolen credential or a forged document, is now a network of automated probes. AI impersonators and synthetic identities work in sync. And the collapse of trust never starts with a breach. It starts when the system can't tell what's real anymore. And there are really four key forces at play. That we see that set the stage for 2026. So one of the key ones is that IDV in 2026 will now apply to humans and non-human actors. 2025 accelerated deepfake threats, regulatory pressures, and fragmented systems. And these two factors have created a perfect storm. Fraud is evolving faster than defenses. And you really can't interact in today's world without identity. So you can't travel, you can't access services, and you can't transact. And that's really sort of setting where we're headed this year in 2026.
So give us some sense of what first of all, then, so you've talked about the nature of fraud has changed. It's become it's sort of quality over quantity. What does the sort of quality attack look like? What do you mean by synthetic and identity attacks?
Well, fraudsters are using real documents and creating synthetic identities whilst utilizing morphing technologies and cloning technologies to actually make a very believable and very well-rounded attack. And they are looking for all sorts of different avenues where they can utilize it. So looking for gaps in systems, and then they're attacking them at scale.
And what sort of capabilities and functionality is AI giving these
Well,
fraudsters?
well, it's now become a very, very accessible. So if you don't even have to go to the dark web, there are apps on mobile phones that allow you to morph faces, create fake documents, and do all sorts of things that used to take professional forgers a long time to do. Now anyone with a smartphone can do that within minutes.
Which is really must be quite shocking from a business perspective. How are the people, the companies you interact with, reacting to this new world of fakery?
It's actually a very interesting perspective because those that are forward looking are trying to stay ahead of the ball. Those that are most of them are succeeding if they're doing the right things. And we'll go into more detail in terms of what they're
Mm.
doing probably a little bit later in our conversation. But some companies are waiting for regulation, saying, well, you know what, until it's regulated that we have to do certain things to protect our customers, we're not going to do anything. And they're the ones that are finding it most challenging. And there's been quite a few cases of reputational damage, significant financial loss, and all of the things that you really don't want to experience as a company.
So Heather, how have you seen this? We started in DCO in 2020, and we were going to solve the identity verification. Decentralized identity was the way out of the trap created by legacy centralized identity architecture. How has our journey changed in the last few years?
Henry's talked about the mass growth of fraud on steroids. And when we started DCO, we, did not see fraud at this level. One of the things, or a few of the things that we're at this intersection of with identity as a result of this extreme amount of fraud is one, like Henry explained, some companies don't want to change, but they're starting to get pressure now as a result of the fraud. And waiting for regulatory compliance as your guidance is not going to help support your business in navigating this fraud because you have to start dealing with it now, or you're definitely in the next year. But two, when you have an increase of fraud, you can also have an increase of friction on your existing customers trying to access the services and pay and engage with your company. And what we're seeing here is the intersection of verifiable credentials as a way to help mitigate fraud that allows for authoritative and authenticated data to be exchanged or identity data to be exchanged with the company, but do so in a way that actually can remove friction. So it's one of those turn the frown upside down situations is with verifiable credentials, we now have the technology to help mitigate this significant growth of fraud, but also deliver a better user experience and allow companies to use a portable, reusable identity that's based on IDV that Regula provides based on the extensive library that they offer and be able to use that in that portable way to be able to reuse it. And then the customers get even more benefit of the value that they get with Regula. And so that's what we're seeing in handling the exponential growth of fraud is that there are new ways in which to port and verify an identity, which means that your customers don't have to take it on the nose because they have to go through a more friction-filled experience just to access your services.
So it's really it seems like almost a magic solution in that you can have the best of all possible digital identity assurance plus none of the hassle that we've come to know from multi-factor authentication or endlessly repeatedly inputting information. I'm sure people say, well, that's too good to be true. We're always accustomed to making to technology that compromises. What would you say to that?
That it's too good to be true? I would say try it out. That would be my answer. Verifiable credentials in combination with IDV that Regula provides is actually a lot easier to try out and do a POC or do a test to see what it is and how it integrates in your existing system. You don't have to rip and replace anything that you've already done. You can use your existing IDV services to help create the credential and then verify it and see the benefit that it does bring to your customers and also to your business, that you can explore use cases or integrations or sharing of data with customers that you had not been able to do before because of the friction that would be involved through direct integrations or federated systems. But also, we have to add another layer of regulatory to regulations to this, and that's privacy and privacy preservation and removing tracking and correlation. And a verifiable credential can do that. So you can have reusability, portability, but also still deliver a privacy preserving experience to your customers that meets regulatory requirements around the world.
So just as maybe for if anybody who's tuning in is a bit maybe unfamiliar with the lexicon, there are plenty of digital credentials, but and some digital credentials many people call them verifiable credentials, but a verifiable credential is something particular. And I often illustrate this. It's the distant difference between an old rotary phone and a mobile phone. You're not tied to a direct integration or a database or a phone home to check in check the authenticity of information when you have your mobile phone. You're fully mobile. And that, by making information fully mobile, we're able to do some really, really interesting things with it. So I think maybe for just a little bit more backgrounder.
I was going to say there is a real issue with the nomenclature here when we talk about a verifiable credential in the realm of decentralized identity. I will hear, well, we have a verifiable credential. What they're describing is a digital credential that is verified in a centralized or a direct integration. It requires a phone home in order to verify that credential. And while I guess it's verifiable, it is not the same as a decentralized identity verifiable credential. And that's a really important distinction to make, and probably something that the decentralized identity technology needs to address in how we call what we term the credential.
Yeah, it's. I mean, Henry, your thoughts on this? Do you encounter confusion over what exactly a verifiable credential is?
Oh, 100%. Because there are many claims out there in terms of what it is and how it works. And everyone at this stage has got their own bent on what they think it is. What we're finding is probably the most critical part of it is that in order to create a verifiable credential, one of the key things is actually creating the identity in the first place and verifying that identity. And that's really probably a crucial factor, because if you get that step wrong, it is extremely difficult to undo down the track. So, and what's interesting about that step is that these days, with all of the threats that we're seeing, no single check is enough. So we've been talking to all of our customers and to businesses in general about the need for multi-layered verification and multi-layered approach. So not using just document or not using just biometrics. It's a matter of using everything in tandem and requiring that layered verification approach. So you use behavioral signal, you use navigation and timing patterns, velocity and IP intelligence, and then documents plus biometric checks all working in tandem to make sure that you've done absolutely everything you can do in order to verify the person, verify their identity, and make sure that the two actually match. And that's really the critical step, because the systems must orchestrate multiple signals to outpace this machine-driven fraud. And this layered authentication creates this stronger defense to actually make that happen.
So
then,
sorry, Heather, go ahead.
And then, like Henry explained, this layered approach also applies to the credentials, the verifiable credentials, because at verification, a relying party can request multiple credentials from the same individual, and that provides a layered verification for a relying party using these credentials. So in one way, you're doubling up on the layers on the issuance, the IDV, the biometrics, and then also layering the credentials upon verification, depending on the risk associated with that transaction.
So I can't quite keep up the slide flow with the conversation, but so one of the areas that the previous slide I just showed was, and we'll go back to that, which was on what's involved in age verification, which has become a really critical issue and is becoming a much more critical issue with restrictions on social media. So we'll get to that in 1 second. But one of the interesting process of verifying a verifiable credential is that verifiable credentials come with their own communications system. And the first sort of, all within the context of something that happens instantly. The first step is you verify that each person in that interaction actually controls their end of the secure channel. Then you have the verifiable credential or credentials that supply the context to who this person is or this organization is. And the cryptography again comes in and then says, well, we know where this credential, who issued this credential. And if we trust this credential, it's a bank, it's a government, so we can trust the information inside because, and the additional layer of cryptography is, we're proving that the data hasn't been altered post-issuance. So in some ways, I often, this probably complicates things a little bit, but, the great information revolution in the 20th century was compression. How do you remove noise from a noisy channel in order to send a signal from one place to another? And solving that problem was actually figuring out how you layered in redundancy so that a signal that was interrupted could be reconstructed. And if this gave us the computer revolution because we could transmit vast amounts of information very efficiently. Because we've removed all the uncertainty around it. This process from identity authentication through to credential issuance and verification is doing the same thing. It's like instead of one check, I look at a paper document or I look at a passport and go, oh, yeah, you kind of look the same. You have maybe 8, 10 layers of proving going on, which makes it just so much more impossible to to conduct fraud around that, because each verification layer is dependent and interacts with the other verification layer. So it's really, it's not magic, it's math, but it's actually super complicated math that we've made really simple for people to use. But I want to go back. And we'll get to it. So Henry, tell us about the issue of what you're doing around age verification.
Look, age verification is certainly a hot topic at the moment, especially with the introduction of new laws in UK, US, and Australia, where I'm from, which has gone very hard at age verification. So across all platforms. And that's actually driven quite a lot of inquiry and a lot of publicity around age verification. And age verification is an interesting topic because from a technological point of view, we've got the technology that can do very good estimates based on facial biometrics. And for many use cases, that is probably sufficient. But there are requirements by certain organizations that require an extra step, and they need more certainty. Because as good as facial verification is in terms of age estimation, it is still a technology that is not 100%. And it's very difficult for it to be 100%. As much as our team aims to get there, it's never going to be that. So combining that with documents is potentially a way to actually make sure that the person, one, you've got a person whose age you can verify via document, as well as facial recognition, as well as combining the two to make sure that it's the right person presenting the document. And certainly with a verifiable credential, that process could be made a lot simpler if it's done once and then used across multiple platforms.
And that's exactly what we see with our customers. The age verification, the proof in order to make the initial determination that they meet the age requirement, the customers that we have then know that their users are going to access and need to use that age verification result multiple times, over and over again, sometimes multiple times in a day. And that they're repeat customers, perhaps it's an age-restricted purchase, and they're going to come and they want them to continue to make purchases. But if they're having to go through and prove their age on a daily basis, let's hope not a transaction, but even a daily basis or every single time they go to the website, it becomes a lot of friction. And so this is a great example where age verification meets the portability and reusability of a verifiable credential to not only meet the regulatory compliance, but to deliver excellent customer experience as well.
So in many ways, it's like the sort of we're almost talking about the need for a zero trust architecture for age verification, because I mean, how you shut down access to social media for a cohort of young people whose a large part of their lives and identity has been lived through social media creates an incentive for fraud, such as getting an older sibling to open an account or a parent to open an account and then for the child to use that account. All of which sets up a really problematic compliance issue for companies who the companies that are being accessed, because where does the liability lie if a kid is using a faked parent ID to access a site. It would seem that the only way to get around this to be fully compliant is to have the kind of continuous verification of a credential that has really, those multiple layers of IDV. Is that where we're heading, you think, Henry?
Absolutely. I actually recently spoke about this on Australian television that the creation of account is the first step, but the ongoing verification that the user that created the account is the actual user of that account is a must. Because as you've rightly pointed out, a parent or an older sibling can create the account and then an underage person can be using that account. So unless you are randomly or systematically re-verifying that person on an ongoing basis, you're actually in breach. And that's the big challenge.
So go, sorry, Heather, please.
And there is also, aside from the enterprise, the retailer, the business who actually has customers who fall under 18 years old, that they want them to engage or they have a subscription, but their concern isn't necessarily that the child is trying to get around the age requirement. The concern is the mutual authentication, that demographic is also very susceptible to being, defrauded by websites that are posing, being phished. And so they want to make sure that when that minor engages with their website, which is a legitimate use because it is a subscription, it is a community that meets requirements like an interest in particular toys or experiences or learning environments, that minor is not being defrauded and taken to another website. That individual, that child is particularly susceptible to being sent to a different website, engaging with someone who's not a legitimate representative of the company. And so what a verifiable credential provides is mutual authentication. In the case where the child is legitimately trying to access their lessons online, the mutual authentication of a verifiable credential provides parents the assurance that their child is actually engaging with the legitimate website. So the fraud is happening from not only minors in one sense trying to get to age-restricted sites and services. On the other hand, you have fraudsters trying to target minors to go to their website under what could be legitimate pretenses. And that's where you can take the age verification and do mutual authentication. One, makes sure that if they're not allowed into an age-restricted site, that the child cannot do a workaround through their parents or fake IDs. On the flip side, we're also protecting children from being defrauded from websites and fraudsters portraying legitimate reasons to engage with those minors.
That's an excellent point. So all of this brings us to two key issues that sort of really provide the power of the sort of the content power of a verifiable credential, and that is document validation and biometrics. First, on document validation, Regula has a library of 16,000. Is that right?
Over 16,000 documents.
Explain to me how that, what does that library do? How do you use it? Because that seems like an incredibly powerful resource.
It absolutely is. So the library that we have of documents, it's identity documents from 254 countries around the world, I believe. And we work very, very closely with the issuing authorities of those documents from around the world, and we get access to a lot of those documents before they are put into public use. And with the number of customers that we have, we get access to every document very, very early on in the piece, even the ones where the issuing authority doesn't directly work with us. The background of Regula, and I didn't talk about that previously, but our background is in forensics. So we started off as a forensic equipment manufacturer, and we have a number of forensic experts on staff. And what we do when we get a new document, obviously we get all of the information from the issuing authority, but we also run our own forensic checks and record all of those into our database of documents and describe all of the forensic features. And then we're able to perform the tests on those documents. So even in remote mobile onboarding, we can actually look at the holograms, we can look at a lot of the protection features of the document to, one, make sure that it is an authentic document, two, make sure it's a live document, that we're not being shown a photocopy or a good print of that document, three, verify all of the details that we can extract from the document in terms of the OCR capabilities and photos and all of the other elements. Run all the necessary checks because there are a lot of security features that are embedded into the OCR capabilities of the documents. And then also work with the, if it's a biometric document, work with the chip. And we can extract all of the data from the chip, match it to the data that was extracted from the image, and also match all of that with external databases for additional information.
And this was, sorry, this was you're describing sort of how the companies effectively met, which was over what technically is called DTC Type 1 from the ICAO, the International Civil Aviation Organization, but which might more colloquially be easier to describe as a digital passport. And your sort of document validation process, did the OCR, optical character recognition, but also was able to use the ICAO public key directory to cryptographically prove that that passport was issued by an authentic passport issuer. So that was step one of the transformation. Step two was the biometrics. So, I mean, we've all seen, or many of us have seen the Mission Impossible movies where, these ridiculously realistic, supposedly prosthetic masks are able to fool everybody. But it came as quite a surprise to realize that people are really trying prosthetics on to fool, to create false images, to fool biometric authentication, that it's actually a real thing. So describe to us the steps of ensuring that the person who's looking at their phone is really the person who's looking at their phone.
Well, prosthetics and printed nylon socks and static photos, and there's a variety of different attack vectors that are utilized. And we luckily have a variety of different techniques that we utilize to combat that in both passive and active biometric facial verification. So it's an ongoing race. It's sort of fraudster versus the good guys, and it's who can get further ahead of each other. And it's a race that never ends. So we actually have a specialist lab within our office where there is a team that is constantly trying to be a fraudster and break our systems. And they look for all sorts of different ways of doing it. Obviously, outside of physically trying to break it with masks and socks, as I've mentioned, there's also injection attacks. There is all sorts of things that can be done. And we are constantly working on all sorts of different ways of how to combat all the potential threats. But as I mentioned before, it is no longer possible to protect with any one way.
Yeah.
So you can't protect with document, you can't protect with biometrics, you can't protect with any step. It has to be a multi-layered approach with all sorts of different checks that then give you that safety and peace of mind if all of them are passed. You
Well,
cannot possibly
yeah.
rely on just one.
Well,
And
yeah.
and that in itself sort of creates potentially a barrier because you may need to put your customer through many different steps. And that's one of the things that we've been working on is an orchestration platform that lets you orchestrate all of the different capabilities that you may want to use before saying, yes, I'm comfortable with the person presenting the ID and the biometrics being the person that we actually need it to be. So orchestration is a big thing going into this year because you cannot rely on any one factor. You have to have multiples, and you don't want to create friction. And you want to be able to provide different workflows for different customers, depending on their type of transaction, depending on their type of risk, depending on their profile, depending on their location. There could be a myriad of things that you want to consider. And being able to, on the fly, orchestrate different workflow processes for different people is something that will be key as we continue on this trajectory of very, very complicated fraud.
Well, it was the ability to extract the embedded data in a passport chip that really, I think, upped the game with digital identity assurance for digital travel credentials or digital passports. Heather, what was the impact of being able to put this multi-layered approach from Regula into a verifiable credential?
Because verifiable credentials are portable and reusable, that initial assurance level at the point of issuance establishes the trust throughout a verifiable credential ecosystem. And what Regula does for a number of our customers is just that. Oftentimes, a customer will come in and Regula's capabilities are fully integrated into our proven platform for our customers. And oftentimes, they'll come in and start off with the passport to create a digital travel credential, or perhaps they'll use a driver's license for a KYC credential for financial services. But then they see the extensive library and options that Regula presents to add even more levels of assurance because you can issue more credentials. And so, what Regula offers customers that they can deploy today is that assurance that seeds an entire ecosystem. And because Regula is constantly focused on different ways that fraud is portrayed, that they are constantly updating and strengthening the libraries to offer more options, it actually allows our customers to deploy use case and solve problems that's beyond their initial problem they're solving. So taking a passport beyond border in through hospitality and pulling that credential or that level of assurance across your entire journey. Being able to create a account credential or KYC credential for financial services, and then being able to use that credential or other credentials created from Regula's library across an ecosystem of partners like other banks, insurance, crypto exchanges. And that's the piece that Regula offers right out of the gate, fully integrated to our customers. And what Regula becomes is that anchor point of entire robust ecosystems based on portable and reusable verifiable credentials.
And one of the key things, the sort of the magical the magical simplicity of putting an authenticated biometric in a verifiable credential is you have a way for anybody to carry a proof of themselves for biometric authentication and deal with and provide a way of avoiding the issue of deep fakes, because if you do a remote or even an in-person biometric scan, you can provide the credential. The credential's been issued to you, it's bound to your device, it's had all the IDV that's gone into it, and then you can present that credential, and software will automatically compare the two. Um, you know, deep. I saw one survey from, I think it was last year, which said that 80% or something of finance teams saw deepfakes as an existential threat to their business success. Henry, what are you seeing in the, I mean, 2 years ago this wasn't on the map of fraud, and now it's sort of the tip of the spear of identity fraud.
Look, that's for sure. We actually run a number of different pieces of research regularly, and you can have a look at any audience members that want to have a look at our website. We actually publish a lot of our reports that we do with a lot of organizations around the world to see what threats they're actually seeing and what's actually happening. And deep fraud is certainly something that is very high on the agenda in both in 2025 and moving into 2026. That said, deep fraud is something that we are constantly looking at and evolving, as I mentioned. But I think moving forward, we're actually looking at potentially new threats outside of deep fraud, and that's around AI agents and automation. So that's probably the next frontier of fraud, and the next thing for everyone out there to have sleepless nights about.
Yeah. Well, so this is something actually. So I co-wrote a paper in 2023 when the idea of co-pilot, the whole co-piloting, AI co-piloting thing was taking off. And I said, well, they've got to be identifiable. You've got to create verifiable identities for AI agents. And in fact, I think 2 weeks ago, we just launched Indicio Proven AI for digital travel, which enables AI agents to authenticate travelers through DTC credentials. And of course, the corollary of that is the passengers are able to identify the AI agents as being genuine and not being spoofed. And this whole area of non-human identity, because of course AI agents spill into autonomous systems, robots, connected devices. There are potentially billions of non-human identities that, to judge from some of the experiments that people are taking with OpenClaw and other sorts of agents, they're just letting them loose on all their data and with chaos. Elon Musk illustrated this with a picture of somebody handing a monkey a machine gun. So one of the things this is a huge area. So Heather, we've just sort of joined NVIDIA Inception program. What is the report from the front lines on giving identity to non-humans?
For us, we talk about non-humans and giving identity to non-humans, but with AI, you're going to have a hybrid mix that the non-humans ultimately engage at some point with human data. Off whether it's either to deliver service through an AI experience, or you have to provide data around non-human identity, ultimately, perhaps to regulators or individuals or auditors that are human. That's the bridge that we have to cross. And so when you add a verifiable credential, you can not only create that non-human identity, but make it completely interoperable and be able to interact with a human identity. If anything, verifiable credentials creates truly a ubiquitous digital world where human and non-human identity can flow seamlessly with consent and with privacy preservation. And it's important that the IDV and biometrics that are originally created to offer the assurance, once again, allows for that foundation, that anchor point of trust in AI systems.
Henry, how do you see this evolving? I mean, the compliance, it seems like lots of people have, in the mass rush to build all of these systems, people have forgotten that there's a privacy issue here with personal data. There's a massive security issue with personal data. Legacy, authentication doesn't work very well for agents. It feels like almost going back to the Wild West days of the early internet, where people said, "Oh, everything's great. We don't need privacy. Everything's great." And it just seems like this is sort of chaos on steroids that we're inviting.
Well, that's exactly right. It's risk of autonomy without oversight. When these agents misfire or get manipulated, who's responsible? Is it the developer? Is it the user? Is it the system? Is it the provider? That's why some regulators around the world that are early in their regulatory sort of compliance are pushing human in the loop requirements for high risk actions, which is a very logical step to take. Will it get implemented quickly enough? Probably not. There are hundreds and thousands of people out there already providing their full credentials, full capabilities to their agents. And, where by providing all of that, there's no guardrails. And if you haven't been in the industry and don't understand the risks involved, you don't set up the guardrails, that can be a very, very costly mistake in the long run. It's why now IDV must authenticate machines and not just people, because you need to be able to trace back, was it a permitted action? Did it have the right credentials? Did it have the right permissions? And is it something that it can do on an ongoing basis? Because the capabilities of doing many, many different steps are there. It's how do you verify that they're legitimately doing those steps, and who authorized and who decided that that should happen?
Well, putting my governance hat on it's another thing I do at Indicio. I think one of the sort of the secret sources of transposing a trust layer for the verifiable credential trust layer for people onto agents and devices and robots is that you have decentralized governance. So you can do that kind of, not in that identity orchestration, you can do that credential trust establishment so that that every agent within either an open system or in a fully autonomous system who gave it an identity, and you can script how that identity has access to X, Y, and Z, what information needs to be presented, and you can do all of this in an auditable way. I mean, my view, although I maybe, is that really the verifiable credentials provides a sort of a governance operating system for the future of digital interaction, whether that's person to agent or agent to agent. That's perhaps something that people haven't grasped yet, but I think they need to grasp really quickly. That
trust,
little
trust frameworks that have very defined boundaries, auditability, and fallback protocols before any autonomy scales any further. So there's a real need for these boundaries and frameworks.
It even strikes me that people don't even know how many agents they might have in a system. Whereas if you start from the basis of issuing each agent with a verifiable credential, which you can do at the a point of creation, you're able to know what that is, where it is, what it's doing, and you can revoke it as needed. And perhaps that's maybe a conversation for we're giving this is the crystal ball part of the hour, but this future is coming rapidly. You probably heard the Zoom alert go off in the background here. and which signals we're coming to the end of this hour. First of all, I'd like, Francis, if anybody has submitted a question, now's the time to let us know what those questions are. Otherwise, I think summing up and reaction, and Heather, is there any other point on the AI component to identity authentication that you want to bring, you want to surface, you want to address, or is it time for a summing up?
We have only just scratched the surface on AI, and what we're witnessing being deployed on identity and AI solutions. One, creates regulatory questions. Two, injects potential fraud or misinformation into those systems. Three, creates user friction, which we're trying to get away from with AI. Um, and four, we are entering a world where there are digital experiences that we've always wanted to deliver or we haven't even imagined. And all of those will only be ultimately successful depending how identity is used. You can imagine a world where you will cross a border in AI. But right now, many of the solutions engaging AI are using manual entry by an individual of their passport information with no validation or verification. And it's being entered in a way where it may not be encrypted, where you may be sending a person's PII into an LLM without any consent whatsoever. But the pressure to deliver AI solutions is so great that organizations are willing to look beyond that. I think it's going to introduce so much additional fraud that it's going to, over time here, limit the potential that these solutions can achieve to regulators or eventually going to get involved here. But three, you want to create these frictionless experiences, and manual data entry or is not the way to do that. And so, verifiable credentials, introducing the IDV systems that Regula offers, all of these are the springboards to create stronger AI solutions than, we can see in the market already. And so this is just scratching the surface, not only for debate and entertainment, but just scratch the surface on how AI companies can quickly gain a competitive advantage by utilizing IDV and biometrics with verifiable credentials. And that is going to be a significant first mover advantage going forward.
Henry, what occupies, well, what are your thoughts on what's been said today, and how do things look going ahead into 2026?
Look, many, many challenges, and the challenges will not stop and they will magnify. And we've just scratched, as Heather mentioned, we only scratched the surface of some of the potential challenges. In terms of what's really important for organizations to focus on, is setting the right foundations. And I think one of the key foundations is reviewing your current IDV platforms, because in many, many cases, they're patchworks of disconnected separate tools for all different steps. And that usually results in complexity, inefficiency, higher costs, and potential chaos that makes it very, very difficult to maintain any consistency. And that's where, I guess, our approach and our IDV workflow platform, orchestration platform, actually changes the game. It integrates all critical components as a single vendor solution, and it gives organizations full control over the verification process across all channels: web, mobile, desktop, kiosk, and it can be ours or any third party. So instead of juggling multiple systems, everything is orchestrated in one place. Workflows, AML checks, reporting, and integrations all synchronized and compliant. So in short, you get flexibility without the fragmentation. And I think that's probably the key foundation that organizations should focus on, because there will be many, many more challenges coming soon. And if you haven't got the right foundation, it'll be very, very difficult to actually work with the new challenges if you haven't got that right base in place as soon as possible.
So there you have it, folks. We are building the foundation for the future of digital interaction. Thank you, Henry, for joining us at a difficult hour from Australia. Thank you, Heather Dahl, for your insights. And I will hand it back over to Francis. Thank you.
Thank you, Trevor. And thanks again to Henry and Heather. We are delighted that so many people are not only interested in this topic, but taking action and realizing how serious and urgent it is to get ahead of the game right now. There are a couple ways you can learn more and also rewatch this webinar or watch it for the first time. So it will be posted on our YouTube channel. There's also Indicio Academy, which is a certification and learning tool provided by Indicio. You can find more about that on our website. And now we have Regula as a wonderful partner, and it's actually built into the solution that Indicio offers, which is proven. So you can get it all in one stop, all together, packaged up and ready to go. So again, thank you for joining us. We hope you enjoyed this conversation. Of course, we have monthly meetups with industry leaders to talk about key and pressing issues. So stay tuned for next month's details. And thank you again for joining, and thank you again for watching.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Take care.